Ethan was just another soldier in the peacekeeping force on the planet Xiphos, far from Earth, in a galaxy filled with strange and powerful alien species. He never expected to be caught up in something bigger than his daily duties. But that day, everything changed. It started like any other mission. He was assigned to patrol a trade route near the royal convoy of Princess Selene, the young heir to the Xiphos throne. The princess was known for her beauty and intelligence, and her family ruled over a fragile alliance of several powerful species, each with their own interests. The convoy had been moving through the dense, jungle-covered planet's terrain, but the peace was about to shatter. Ethan, on the lookout from a distance, noticed something strange. The usual calm was broken by the sound of blaster fire in the distance. His instincts kicked in immediately, and he activated his comms. "Command, this is Ethan. Something's wrong." "I'm going to investigate," he said, his voice steady but urgent. He didn't wait for approval. In a matter of seconds, he was moving toward the sounds of chaos, his heart racing. He knew the princess was in danger. His mission had always been to protect the innocent, but this was different. His actions today might change everything. As Ethan neared the convoy, he could see it clearly now. Enemy attackers had ambushed the convoy. The air was thick with smoke, and debris from the attack littered the ground. His heart sank as he spotted the royal guards scattered across the area, struggling to defend the princess. The attackers, humanoid and masked, moved with swift efficiency, taking down anyone who stood in their way. Then he saw her. Princess Selene stood at the center, her face filled with determination, but fear lurked in her eyes. She held a weapon in her hand, but it was clear she was no soldier. She was trying to fight back. But the situation was getting worse by the second. Without hesitation, Ethan sprinted toward her, using the cover of nearby trees. He'd been trained for moments like this. As he closed the distance, his mind focused on one thing: saving the princess. He dove into action, taking down 2 attackers with quick, precise shots. His training had prepared him for this moment, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. He reached the princess, who was now surrounded by enemies. Her face was flushed with both the heat of battle and the fear that this might be the end. "Close!" Ethan shouted as he moved between her and the attackers. His gun was raised, and he fired without hesitation. Knocking out another of the masked attackers, Princess Selene, although startled by his sudden appearance, quickly grasped the severity of the situation. She could see that Ethan wasn't just a soldier, he was their only chance. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed his arm and followed his lead as they ducked behind a large rock. The enemy closed in, but Ethan had a plan. "We need to move now," Ethan said, his voice calm but commanding. "Keep your head down and stay close." Now the princess nodded, her expression firm. She trusted him, even though she barely knew him. There was something about Ethan, a quiet confidence, that reassured her in this moment of danger. As they ran for cover, Ethan fired back, picking off attackers with practiced ease. They were getting closer to the edge of the jungle, where the royal guard had set up a defense line. But before they could reach it, a shot rang out, grazing Ethan's shoulder. He winced but didn't slow down. His focus was on getting the princess to safety. Finally, they reached a clearing, and a royal transport ship hovered above them, its ramp lowered. The princess and Ethan rushed up the ramp, and the ship quickly ascended into the sky. Once they were safely aboard, Ethan could finally allow himself a breath of relief. His shoulder burned, but it wasn't serious. The princess, though still shaken, seemed to calm down once they were in the air. "You did it," she said, her voice quiet but full of gratitude. "You saved me." Ethan didn't respond right away. He was too focused on making sure they were out of immediate danger. The ship's pilot confirmed that the attackers had been dealt with. But the real battle was just beginning. Once they were in the clear, Princess Selene turned to him, her eyes meeting his for the first time since the chaos. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, "but I will. I swear it." Ethan shook his head, his expression serious. "No need to thank me. It's my job. I was just doing what I had to do." The princess studied him for a moment, as if trying to understand him. The calmness in his eyes was strange to her. Most people were afraid in the heat of battle, but not him. He wasn't just a soldier. He was someone who understood what it meant to protect, to give everything to ensure others were safe. After a long pause, she spoke again. I don't know who you are, but thank you. I'm Celine. And you are? Ethan, he replied simply. Just a soldier. The princess smiled faintly. Well, Ethan, I think you've earned more than just my thanks. You've earned my respect. Ethan gave a short nod but didn't respond. His thoughts were already on the mission ahead. The ambush had been just the beginning. Whoever was behind it wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But now, with Princess Celine safe for the moment, Ethan knew he would do whatever it took to protect her. He had no idea just how much this moment would change his life, but deep down, he sensed that it would be the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could imagine. The journey to the palace was long, and the quiet after the chaos of the ambush seemed unnatural. Princess Celine sat across from Ethan, her face still pale from the battle, but her expression now one of deep thought. Ethan, meanwhile, kept his focus on the stars outside the transport ship. His shoulder throbbed, but it wasn't serious, and it didn't slow him down. His mind, however, was busy. He had never thought a rescue mission would lead him to the heart of a royal family's troubles. The palace came into view, rising from the green landscape of Scifi. The sight of it, so majestic and powerful, made Ethan realize the responsibility that came with being close to someone like Princess Celine. She wasn't just a person. She was a symbol of the future of an entire alliance. Once the ship touched down, they were immediately surrounded by the palace guard. Ethan, although still in his military uniform, was given special attention, with more respect than he was used to. Celine stepped out first, her regal air returning as she walked towards the palace entrance. Ethan followed closely, trying to remain as unnoticed as possible, but the way the guards looked at him made him feel like he was part of something much bigger than himself. Inside, the throne room was grand and filled with rich decorations from every species in the alliance. The air smelled faintly of incense, and the walls were adorned with portraits of past rulers. At the far end of the room stood King Tharos, Selena's father, his tall figure framed by the massive throne behind him. His eyes were sharp, his presence commanding. He was not someone who would easily be forgotten. As they entered, King Thoros rose from his seat, his gaze shifting between Ethan and his daughter. Celine, my dear, he said, his voice deep and steady. You've returned safely. But I sense there is more to this than just a simple rescue. Celine bowed her head in respect before replying. Yes, father. Ethan saved my life. Without him, I would not be standing here today. Ethan stood quietly, his hands at his sides, his expression neutral. He had no interest in attention, but he could feel the weight of the king's gaze upon him. King Theros studied him for a long moment. Then his gaze softened, though only slightly. I see, he said, before turning to one of his advisors. Prepare the room. We must discuss this properly. The advisor hurried away, and Tharos gestured for Celine and Ethan to sit. As they took their seats, the king paced slowly before speaking again. You have done a great service, Ethan, and for that, I am grateful, King Tharos began. However, there is more to this than simple gratitude. In our culture, saving a royal life binds you to that royal. It is not just an act of duty. It is a bond, a promise between you and the royal family. Ethan's brow furrowed in confusion. He wasn't sure what the king meant. A bond? He repeated, his voice careful. Yes, the king replied. A bond in our terms is a deep connection between two souls. It is not to be taken lightly. Once the bond is formed, you are tied to the royal family, and that connection cannot be severed. You are now bound to Celine by the act of saving her. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. He had always been a soldier. His job was simple, protect and serve. But this was something else entirely. I don't understand. Ethan said, I did my duty, that's all. I didn't expect anything in return. The king's gaze was unyielding. That is the problem. You see, Ethan, saving a royal is not just about duty. It is a symbolic act that must be honored. We do not take such things lightly." His voice lowered. As a result, you must enter into a formal bond with Selene. It is expected for both our people and your own. This will ensure peace, security, and trust between your species and mine. Selene looked at Ethan, her expression unreadable. She hadn't expected her father's response to be so firm. She had been grateful to Ethan, yes, but this was beyond what she had imagined. He had never been given much choice in anything. But this felt like something different, something that would change everything. Ethan sat up straighter, his mind racing. He had no idea what this meant for him. "A bond?" he repeated, trying to process the weight of the words. "With the princess?" The king nodded. "Yes, the ritual must take place. It is a way to show the people that you are both allies, united in a common cause." Ethan looked at Selene again, meeting her eyes. She didn't look scared, but there was uncertainty in her gaze. He could tell she didn't want this any more than he did. But she was the princess, and duty was always something her family came first. Ethan let out a slow breath. He had never been one for politics, but he understood enough to know that this wasn't just about him or Selene. It was about keeping peace between their worlds. But still, couldn't help but feel trapped. Okay, a bond? How could he possibly agree to something like that? The room was silent for a long moment, broken only by the soft sounds of the palace guards shifting their weight outside. Finally, Ethan spoke again. "And if I don't agree to this bond, what happens then?" The king's gaze hardened. "Then you risk angering the royal family and jeopardizing the alliance. There will be consequences not just for you, but for your entire people." Ethan felt the pressure of the situation weigh heavily on him. His duty as a soldier had never felt more complicated than it did in this moment. He wasn't sure what to say or do. All he knew was that the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. Selene, noticing his hesitation, stood up slowly. "Ethan," she said softly, "we don't have to do this, but we may not have a choice. I didn't ask for this, and neither did you. But sometimes we have to do things for the greater good." Her words were simple, but they struck a chord within him. Perhaps this bond wasn't just about political duty. Perhaps in time, it could be something more. The palace was filled with tension as Ethan stood in the grand hall waiting for the ritual to begin. His thoughts raced as he looked around the lavish room. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries depicting battles and victories, each a symbol of power and legacy. In the center of the room, an altar was set up, glowing softly with an ethereal light that made the air feel charged with something otherworldly. The king had insisted on this ritual without much explanation, but Ethan had no choice now. Beside him, Princess Selene stood silently. She wore a flowing gown, the delicate fabric shimmering in the light, a far cry from the soldier's uniform that Ethan wore. Her face was calm, though he could see the worry in her eyes. They had been through so much already, and now they were about to face a tradition neither of them truly understood. Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. He had saved the princess's life, but now, as the king had demanded, they were bound together in a way he hadn't anticipated. The idea of a bond had seemed foreign to him at first. But after hearing the king's words, he realized that it wasn't just a formality. It was a deep connection that would tie them together in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. As the doors to the hall closed, the soft murmurs of the courtiers faded away, leaving only the quiet tension between Ethan and Selene. The ritual was about to begin. King Theros entered the room, his presence as imposing as ever. He walked slowly toward the altar, his robes trailing behind him like the shadow of authority. Behind him were several high-ranking officials and elders, their faces filled with curiosity and expectation. "Ethan," the king said, his voice steady, "you stand before us today, not just as a soldier, but as a protector of the royal family. You have done more than your duty. You have saved my daughter's life, and for that, we will honor you." Ethan stood tall, though he could feel the tension tightening in his chest. This wasn't just about gratitude. It was about more than... he could understand. He nodded politely, but his mind raced. What was this bond really about? What would it mean for him, for Selene, and for the peace between their peoples? The king motioned for Ethan and Selene to approach the altar. They walked forward, side by side, and stood before the raised platform. The elders began to chant softly. In an ancient language, the sound like a whisper of wind, filling the room with an almost hypnotic rhythm. It was clear that this ceremony was sacred, tradition that had been passed down for generations. Selene turned to Ethan, her eyes meeting, his with an intensity he hadn't seen before. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. He didn't know what to say, but somehow he knew that this was a moment they had to face together. He gave her a small nod, though he didn't feel ready at all. The high priest stepped forward, his face solemn. He raised his hands, signaling for the ceremony to begin. The room grew even quieter, the air thicker, as the ritual took its course. A soft, warm light surrounded them, and the priest began to speak in the ancient tongue of the Xiphos people. Ethan could feel a strange sensation in the air, a pull that seemed to draw him closer to Selene. His heart raced, and he instinctively reached out to her. As his hand brushed hers, something extraordinary happened. A rush of emotions flooded his mind, feelings of hope, fear, and even a strange sense of familiarity. It was as if he had known her for years, not just days. His pulse quickened as the sensation grew stronger. It wasn't just a physical connection, it was something deeper, something that went beyond words. The bond was real, and it was happening. Now, whether he was ready for it or not, let it be sealed, the priest declared. And in that moment, a soft glow surrounded their hands as they joined. A surge of energy ran through Ethan, and for a brief moment, he felt everything Selene's: fear, her determination, and her hopes for the future. He also felt her warmth, her courage, a strength that he had never expected to encounter. But it wasn't just her emotions that flooded him. He could feel his own emotions intertwining with hers. The connection was intense, more than he could have imagined. It was as if their very souls were reaching out to one another, forming a link that was unbreakable. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Everything around them disappeared, and all that mattered was the bond they were forging. The weight of the royal expectations, the danger of the world outside the palace walls, it all faded away. Then, as quickly as it had come, the sensation ended. Ethan blinked, his breath coming in short gasps. He felt a wave of exhaustion, but also a sense of clarity. He had never been so aware of another person, of their thoughts, their fears, and their desires. And he could feel something else too, something that hadn't been there before. He turned to look at Selene, and for the first time he saw her not just as a princess, but as a person. Her eyes met his, and she gave him a small, tentative smile. It was a smile that said she understood what had just happened between them, even if she wasn't entirely sure what it meant. The king, watching the ceremony with a satisfied expression, stepped forward once again. "It is done," he said, his voice full of authority. "You are bound. This bond will ensure peace between our worlds. And it will unite you, Ethan, with my daughter. You will both serve as symbols of our alliance." Ethan stood still, his mind reeling. He hadn't expected the bond to be so powerful, so immediate. But now that it had happened, there was no turning back. He had been connected to Selene in a way that he could never have imagined, and though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew that they would face it together. The days that followed the bonding ritual were filled with tension and uncertainty. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between him and Princess Selene. The bond they shared, created in that ceremonial moment, was still very new, and neither of them quite knew what to make of it. Selene, who had once seemed so distant and regal, now felt more like someone he could truly understand. It was strange, feeling so connected to her, yet still unsure of how much he should let himself care for her. She was royalty, and he was just a soldier. His life had always been clear: cut, protect, and serve. But this bond, this unexpected connection, complicated everything. Ethan spent most of his time with the royal guards, training and preparing for whatever challenges might come. Yet, even in those moments of solitude, he couldn't stop thinking about Celine. He saw her in the palace, walking through the halls with grace, her eyes always looking ahead, as though burdened by the weight of her responsibilities. He understood that now, more than ever, it wasn't long before Ethan realized that the world of Xiphos was not as peaceful as it seemed. He had known that there were political struggles, but the deeper he got into his new role as a protector of the royal family, the more he saw the cracks in the alliance. The seemingly unbreakable peace that the Xiphos had built was fragile. Beneath the surface, tensions were rising between the various factions of the alliance. One evening, after a long day of training, Ethan was called to the royal chambers. The invitation came from Princess Celine herself. He wasn't sure why she wanted to speak with him, but he knew it had to be important. As he walked through the grand corridors, he could hear the faint hum of palace life around him, the whispers of servants, the distant sounds of music and laughter. But tonight, the palace felt quieter, as if something was about to happen. When Ethan arrived at the chambers, Celine was standing by a large window, looking out over the city. The glow of the twin moons bathed her in soft light, making her appear almost ethereal. She turned as he entered, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of relief and something else. Something deeper that Ethan couldn't quite place. "Ethan," she greeted him softly. "Thank you for coming." He nodded, but he couldn't hide the confusion in his eyes. "Is everything all right, Your Highness?" Celine hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words carefully. She motioned for him to sit, and he did so. The room was quiet, but there was an unspoken tension in the air. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something I've kept from everyone, even my father." Ethan's curiosity piqued. Knew that the princess had a duty to her people, but he had never seen her this vulnerable before. "What is it?" Celine took a deep breath and began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to say. "When my father insisted that you and I bond, it wasn't just for the alliance's sake. I've been hiding a secret for years, Ethan. A secret that could change everything." Ethan frowned, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What kind of secret?" Celine walked over to a table in the center of the room, her fingers brushing over a small, ancient-looking box. She opened it slowly, revealing a set of intricate scrolls, each one carefully sealed. "These are ancient texts from my ancestors," she explained, lifting one of the scrolls. "They speak of a prophecy, one that involves a human." Ethan's eyes widened. "A human? But I know this is hard to believe," she said, cutting him off. "But the prophecy speaks of a human who will be connected to the Xiphos royal family through a powerful bond. This person is meant to either save our people or bring about their downfall." Ethan sat back, stunned. "Wait, are you saying that I'm part of this prophecy? That I'm the one who is supposed to?" Celine nodded slowly. "Yes. The texts say that when a human is bonded to a Xiphos royal, great changes will come. They will either lead us to peace or destroy us." Ethan's mind raced. How could this be? He was just a soldier. He didn't believe in prophecies or fate. He'd always lived in the real world, where actions had consequences and people made their own futures. But this was beyond anything he had ever expected. "But how can you be sure?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with doubt. "This could all just be a coincidence." "I didn't believe it either," Celine confessed, "until the bonding ritual. That's when I felt it. The bond. It's not just a connection, Ethan. It's something powerful. I can feel it every time we're near each other." Ethan looked at her, his heart pounding. Could he really be the one the prophecy spoke of? He had never asked for any of this. All he had wanted was to keep his people safe. Now he was caught in something far bigger than himself, something that he couldn't control. Selena's eyes softened. "I didn't want to tell you this. I didn't want to burden you with this knowledge, especially after what you did for me. But now that the bond is formed, I can't keep it a secret anymore." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything she had just said. He had come to protect her, to do his job, but now his role seemed to be changing in ways he didn't understand. "We need to figure this out together," Celine said, her voice firm with resolve. "The future of our worlds depends on it." For the first time since the bonding, Ethan felt the weight of his new reality. It wasn't just about protecting the princess anymore. It was about something much greater, something that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. The news of the prophecy weighed heavily on Ethan's mind, and the days that followed felt like a blur. He had always believed that his role in life was simple: protect and serve. But now, with the weight of a prophecy hanging over him, the world had been turned upside down. The bond he had formed with Princess Celine had become something deeper and more complex than he ever imagined. Celine seemed to struggle with the revelation. She had always been a leader, trained to make decisions for the good of her people. But this secret, this prophecy, had shaken her more than she let on. She had confided in Ethan, but now she wasn't sure who she could trust. Could he truly be the one to save them, or was he the one who would bring about their downfall? One evening, after another long day of preparing for the unknown, Ethan was once again called to the royal chambers. The tension in the air was thick as he made his way through the hallways, his boots echoing softly in the stillness of the palace. He had grown used to the quiet, but tonight it felt different. There was something urgent in the air, something that he couldn't quite place. When he arrived at Selena's chambers, she was already waiting for him. Her eyes were wide with worry, and her face was pale. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice laced with concern. "We need to talk." Ethan entered the room, his expression serious. "What's going on?" Celine walked toward him, her steps hesitant. "Something's happening. My father's advisors. They've been receiving messages from one of the other planets in the Alliance. There's been talk of an uprising, rebellion, one that could destroy everything we've worked for." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The peace that had held their alliance together for so long was fragile, and now it was beginning to crack. "Who's behind it?" Celine hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "We don't know. But it's clear that the rebellion is being fueled by someone within the royal court, someone close to my father." Ethan's mind raced. If there was a traitor within the royal family, it would change everything. The alliance between their people would be shattered, and chaos would spread. "Across the galaxy, we need to find out who's behind this before it's too late," Ethan said, his voice low and determined. "We can't let this rebellion succeed." Celine nodded. "I agree. But I need your help, Ethan. I can't do this alone." Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness toward her. He had already promised to protect her, but now, with the stakes higher than ever, he knew that this wasn't just about her safety anymore. This was about the future of their people. "We'll figure this out," Ethan said firmly. "I won't let anything happen to you." The next few days were a blur of meetings and investigations. Ethan worked alongside Celine and her trusted allies, digging into the secrets of the royal court. As they delved deeper into the mystery, they uncovered more troubling information. The rebellion was growing stronger, and its supporters were in positions of power, positions that were crucial to the survival of the alliance. One night, as Ethan and Celine pored over the information they had gathered, they were interrupted by a sudden commotion outside the chamber doors. The sounds of shouting and footsteps grew louder, and before they could react, the door burst open. Several guards rushed in, their weapons drawn. "Your Highness, there's been an attack," one of the guards said urgently. "The palace is under siege. The rebels have struck." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Sooner than they expected. "Where's your father?" he asked, already moving toward the door. "His location is unknown," the guard replied, "but we believe he's still inside the palace." "Then we need to find him," Ethan said. Grabbing his weapon from the nearby table, he turned to Celine. "Stay close to me. We'll get through this." Celine hesitated but nodded. "I trust you, Ethan. Let's go." They rushed through the palace, weaving through the halls and corridors, their footsteps echoing in the chaos. The palace was a maze, but Ethan knew its layout well. As they reached the main hall, they saw the damage. The walls had been scorched by blaster fire, and the once beautiful tapestries were torn and burned. It was clear that the rebels were relentless, and they weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. Ethan led Celine to a safe room, hoping to find her father there. But when they entered, it was empty. The only thing left behind was a faint trail of blood leading to the far corner of the room. "Father," Celine whispered, her voice cracking with worry. Ethan quickly assessed the situation. "We don't have much time. If the rebels have your father, they won't hesitate to use him as leverage. Need to move now." They made their way through the palace, each step more dangerous than the last. The sounds of blaster fire echoed in the distance, and the air was thick with tension. They reached the throne room where they found the entrance barricaded. Ethan pushed forward using all his strength to break through the door. Inside the room was in chaos. The rebels were everywhere, but in the center of the room, King Tharos was being held captive by two armed attackers. "Stop right there." One of the rebels shouted as Ethan and Celine entered. The rebels raised their weapons, aiming them at the royal family. Ethan's heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. With one swift movement, he took down the nearest rebel, disarming him in a flash. Celine stood beside him, her eyes filled with determination. "This ends now," Ethan said, his voice unwavering. Together, they fought their way through the rebels. One by one, their movements coordinated and precise. The bond they shared made them a formidable team, and as the last of the rebels were taken down, Ethan turned to Celine. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with relief. But Celine's expression was still serious. "It's not over yet. We've only just begun." The rebel attack had shaken the palace to its core. The once peaceful halls, filled with the sound of footsteps and soft conversations, were now filled with the quiet hum of anxious energy. Ethan had never seen the palace in such chaos, but even amid the chaos, he felt a strange sense of purpose. He had sworn to protect Princess Celine, and now he found himself protecting an entire kingdom. After the battle in the throne room, where they had successfully rescued King Tharos and driven back the remaining rebels, things calmed down, but only slightly. The royal family was safe for now, but the damage had been done. The rebels had made their presence known, and the palace was no longer the sanctuary it once was. Ethan and Celine stood on the balcony overlooking the sprawling gardens. The peaceful landscape seemed out of place with the turmoil inside the palace walls. Celine's eyes were focused on the horizon, her thoughts clearly far away, as if she were trying to see past the violence of the present to some peaceful future. Ethan stood beside her, trying to understand what the future might hold for them now. "Your father's going to want answers," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "This wasn't just an attack. It's a declaration of war." Celine nodded slowly. "I know, and we're all going to have to be ready for what comes next." Her voice was soft but strong, filled with a quiet resolve that had always been a part of her, even before this war began. Ethan had learned a lot about the princess and the time they'd spent together. She was more than just royalty. She was a leader, one who carried the weight of an entire galaxy on her shoulders. And he couldn't help but respect her more every day. He looked over at her, noticing the tension in her posture. "We'll get through this. Together." Celine turned to him, her eyes softening as she met his gaze. "I don't know what I would do without you, Ethan. I've never had anyone I could truly trust like I trust you now." The bond they shared, the bond that had formed between them during the ritual, had become more than just a political alliance. It was something real, something deep. They had fought side by side, and in that fight, they had built a connection stronger than either of them could have anticipated. Ethan felt the same way. The connection they shared had become a lifeline. Something that kept him grounded even as everything around him seemed to fall apart. But there was still so much uncertainty. The rebellion wasn't over. It was only just beginning. "I know you're worried about your people," Ethan said quietly. "But I'm here. You're not alone in this." Celine smiled faintly, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. "I've always been alone. Even with all the people around me, I've had to make the hard decisions alone. But now," she paused, looking at Ethan again. "Now, I'm not alone, and that means everything." Ethan could feel the weight of her words. He had always been a soldier, used to fighting alone, but with Celine, he wasn't just fighting for duty anymore. He was fighting for her, for the future of the Alliance, and for something bigger than himself. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. The door to the balcony opened, and King Theros entered, his expression unreadable. "Ethan Selene," the king said, his voice deep and heavy with the gravity of the situation. "We need to talk." Selene turned to her father, her face hardening with determination. "I know. It's time we faced the truth." The king nodded, his eyes scanning the garden, as if searching for answers in the peaceful scene. "The rebellion isn't the only problem we face. There are forces at work within our alliance that want to tear everything apart. We have traitors among us." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The king's words confirmed his worst fears. The rebellion wasn't just a random act of violence, it was part of something much bigger. And if they didn't act quickly, the entire alliance could fall. "We need to find out who's behind this," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. "And we need to do it fast." King Thoros turned to him, his expression firm. "That's where you come in, Ethan. You're no longer just a soldier. You've proven yourself to me, and to my daughter. Your loyalty has earned you a place at my side." Ethan was taken aback. "Your Majesty, I'm just here to protect the princess." The king's gaze softened for a moment. "And you have done that well. But now, I'm asking you to be more than that. I'm asking you to help us uncover the truth. You're not alone in this anymore. The bond between you and Selenia, what it represents, can be the key to saving everything we hold dear." Selene looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with both trust and concern. She knew what this meant. They would be facing enemies not just on the battlefield, but within their own ranks. The stakes had never been higher. "Your bond is powerful, Ethan," the king continued, "and it can unite us when we need it the most. Together, we can fight this. Together, we can bring the traitors to light." Ethan looked at Selene, her face filled with resolve. She had always been a leader, but now she wasn't leading alone. They were a team, and that bond, what had started as a political move, was now the foundation of something greater. "I'll do whatever it takes," Ethan said, his voice resolute. "I'll fight for you, for your people, and for this alliance." Stepped forward, her hand finding his. The weight of her gaze was enough to fill him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt before. "We'll do it together," she said, her voice steady. "And we'll make sure the future is one worth fighting for." The king nodded in agreement. "Then we start tomorrow. We'll move quickly, before the traitors have time to strike again." As Ethan and Selene stood together, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain: the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but as long as they stood together, they would have a chance. The future of the galaxy rested in their hands, and they would fight with everything they had